Any bill introductions? Anybody in the committee? Eileen's saying please no. Anybody in the audience have a bill introduction? All right, very good. Thank you so much. Okay, at this time, I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 22. Eileen, would you like to give us a briefing?
I'm feeling chipper now because the caffeine must be kicking in. So Senate Bill 22 requires title agents to make their audit reports available for inspection instead of submitting those reports annually. And it requires the amount of surety bonds filed with the Commissioner of Insurance to be $100,000 uniformly, and it eliminates the controlled business exemption in certain counties. So the bill amends KSA 40-1137 and 40-1139 pertaining to title insurance agents. And it also amends KSA 40-2404 pertaining to unfair methods of competition and unfair or deceptive trade acts or practices in insurance. Under current law, 40-1137 requires a title agent to have an annual audit made of that agent's escrow, settlement, and closing deposit accounts conducted by a CPA or a title insurer for which the agent has a licensing agreement. The title agent is required to submit a copy of that audit report to the Commissioner within 30 days of the close of the calendar year for which the audit is issued. Senate Bill 22 would no longer require that that audit report be submitted to the Commissioner, but would only require that the report be available for inspection upon request. In Section 2, under KSA 1139, currently, title agents are required to file a surety bond or irrevocable letter of credit with the Commissioner, and that amount of the surety bond or irrevocable letter of credit is required. The amount of that is required depends on the location of the property and the population of the county in which that agent does the majority of their business. Senate Bill 22 would standardize the amount of the surety bond or letter of credit required and make it $100,000. In Section 3, under current law, KSA 40-2404 says that no title insurer or title agent may accept an order for business if the agent or insurer knows that the business will constitute controlled business for them, and if 70% or more of their closed title orders for that title insurer or title agent during the past 12 months immediately preceding the month in which this transaction would take place is derived controlled business. Currently, the statute grants an exception for transactions involving real estate that takes place in counties with a population of 10,000 people or less, and this bill would eliminate that exception. And Madam Chair, I can stand for questions.
Thank you so much. Committee, do you have any questions of Eileen? It sounds complicated when you're explaining, but it's pretty straightforward.
Straightforward.
Yes. Very good. Okay, thank you, Eileen. Okay, we have proponent testimony today from Kyle Strothman. Kyle, would you want to come up and introduce yourself and visit with us?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee. Yes, my name is Kyle Strothman. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff at the Kansas Department of Insurance, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify in support of the department's bill on Senate Bill 22. So the intent behind this bill really is to eliminate and simplify some pieces of our title insurance regulations that the department oversees. We've been looking at some of the regulations and statutes around our title industry and that regulation for a few years now. And last year we had a bill ready to go that would make some of the changes that you're going to see today, but it went a little further. We received and realized that we are moving forward without some buy-in from some key stakeholders in the industry. They let those concerns known to us. We took that bill, went back to the drawing board, met with the title folks over the course of the summer and the interim, and have come up with the bill that you see here today. So I want to really emphasize that we have tried to work with both the title industry on this, as well as still trying to accomplish some of the things that we want to accomplish with this bill. So along those lines, there is one mistake we did make, and I think you'll see this requested from the title industry in their testimony as well. But when we drafted this bill, or when we sent the bill over to be drafted, we had intended this to take effect on January 1 of 2026, really to give the industry folks and the people that we regulate time to adjust to this bill, particularly I think on the surety bond piece. That we made a mistake when we sent the bill over and left it as publication and on the statute. So we would request, when you work this bill, an amendment to make it January 1 of 2026. So just want to clarify that. I'll walk through, I think Eileen did a good job of sort of explaining this, and you have, of course, our written testimony. I'll walk through sort of the reasoning behind these three pieces of the changes that we're seeking here. The first piece is the audit change, making it upon request as opposed to rather having it submitted by every title agent on file. The reason that the department thinks this is important is these audits are required by statute. We're not required by statute to actually review them. When those audits are actually submitted to us, we are required to file them and keep them on file, but there's nothing in statute that actually is requiring us to review them. We think that requesting a record for the sake of the record, to just have it, is not really in keeping with the efficiencies and the way that the department seeks to regulate these industries. Other like underwriters or other interested parties can still get access to these audits. And when it comes to the idea of these audits being important for consumer protections, a consumer can still get access to this audit, and we can still know through, if there's an issue and a consumer lets us know that we would need to request an audit, we still have that possibility. This would just remove having to collect the thousands and thousands of audits that we get every year and the hours and hours of staff time that it takes to basically file these. So we think this will create an efficiency for us as well as the title industry, who doesn't have to send these. They still will have to have the title or the audits done. That does not change. They will still have to keep those on file, but they will not have to send them to us every year. The second change is the surety bond change, and that is taking the current three-tiered system that is based on some county population rules and simplifying it into one bond. When we talked to the title folks over the interim, this was something that, you know, they had, to be fair, they had raised, I think, some concerns that by moving it to a single bond that could impede or add an additional financial burden to some of these agents and title insurers. We fully acknowledge that, but when we look at these bonds and these prohibitions, or at least the levels that are required by the counties or the county population exemption, or not the exemption, I'm getting ahead of myself on that, but on the levels, a $25,000 bond or a $50,000 bond really isn't that significant in terms of what potentially these bonds could be used for, which is to make somebody who is aggrieved or has been affected by a title agent not doing what they're supposed to. We think by going to the $100,000 bond, that will help us both not have to, again, there's not really a great way for us to verify that, in fact, you know, when they say they're operating in X county, they tell us that by simply affidavit, and then they submit the bond. We have no way of really drilling down and verifying that they, in fact, are only doing business in a county that has a population of, you know, that would require that lower level of bond. So we think this not only simplifies that for the agents, they have to provide one single level of bond, but this will also raise that level of bond, which ultimately benefits a consumer who could be, you know, called to collect on one of these bonds. And then the last piece is the controlled business county exemption. Controlled business really refers to any portion of a title insurer or an agency's business that was referred to it by a producer of title business. If that producer of title business has a financial interest in the title agency receiving the referral. So really, if you are, somebody is directing to the title agent that they have a vested financial interest essentially in that title insurer, that agency. Controlled business is not prohibited, but the current statute limits it to about 70% of your total title business that an insurer would do. Currently, there is also an exemption of 10,000 in populations or counties with populations of 10,000 or less. That prohibition on controlled business, that 70%, does not apply. This is problematic for us for several reasons. One, we think it sort of creates sort of an unlevel playing field across the state. The second, and which is probably the most problematic for us, is again, this comes down to something that is very difficult to enforce from the department's perspective. Agents, insurers are required to commit to or submit to us controlled business reports, which again is essentially an affidavit where they sign under penalty of perjury attesting to how much controlled business they did and in what counties they did it all in, or if they operated in counties where this exemption would take place. And that's it. They don't submit financial records with that. They don't submit any additional records with it. They submit that affidavit to attest to that. So were this to be called into question, we would have to further seek those records that we don't currently have. We just have no great way currently to enforce this prohibition on the county side. And really, we just think that this creates just additional compliance costs that are unnecessary and something that we essentially can't enforce as it is. So we would seek the elimination of that prohibition by county, or the county population piece. I believe Kansas is one of the only, if not the only state that still has this type of county prohibition regarding controlled business on the books. So we certainly wouldn't be, I think we're one of the last to have that. So really, this bill ultimately just will help the department clean up these unenforceable sections, or at least hard, difficult to enforce currently, sections of our statutes, so that we can better utilize our staff's time and focus on truly bad actors. I think last year we only had 6 complaints out of the 3,600 complaints that we receive at the department. Only 6 of them had to deal with the title industry. I think the year before that was 3. We believe that this will allow us to focus on instances where there are truly bad actors, and it doesn't remove any consumer protections by doing so. So, Madam Chair, with that, I would stand for questions.
Thank you, Kyle. Committee, do you have questions for Kyle today? Senator Fack.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you for your presentation, Kyle. How many title agents do we have in Kansas?
So my rough number is about 2,000. I actually think the last count I saw was right at 2,000, but I can get you a more accurate number, but right around 2,000.
Okay. So I'm sitting here kind of hung up on that first one about the CPA and what we require on that kind of thing. So it says inspection upon request. What would trigger an inspection upon request?
So there's a lot of ways we could approach this from the department's perspective. For example, if we got a consumer complaint where they alleged that there was some mishandling of their funds when they were closing on a home or an escrow account, that could then trigger us to say, we have that title agent who we have jurisdiction over, please send us the audit as part of that trigger. So that is what we could do. It would also allow us, instead of taking these things and filing, we could do spot checks, because we can request it really at any time. So it would allow us to sort of better manage and better utilize our existing resources if we deem that appropriate.
So I like what you said about spot checks. I think if you're going to do something like this, they still need to know they might get a letter, and because I would think if something was a problem, this was put on in the law for a reason at one time, and I don't want to find something out that's a problem after it's already happened. So making sure those CPA reports out there, what happens if, well, I didn't get it done, or it was 2 years late, and you get into that kind of stuff. So
Well, and
I like the spot check part. I agree with you on every one of them every year, but just want to make that comment about that.
absolutely, we appreciate that. And I want to elaborate that on a bit. The underwriters that write for title, other business interests, parent companies where these insurers might be, they are going to want these audits as well. So it's really in the best interest of the title agent, not just from the, that they hold a license or the department holds a license over them. It's in their best interest just from a business practice to make sure that they're getting these audits done. We're not the only sort of, I guess, pressure point there for them, so.
Thank you for that, and that was a great question because it kind of triggered one that I was thinking when you were speaking, and you may have just answered it, but if you're going to pay someone to conduct an audit on your business, someone needs to get that audit and, it's proof of your business practices. So who do these title companies send their audits to that do actually, from a regulatory standpoint, audit the audit? You know what I'm saying?
Certainly, and that's where I mentioned the underwriters
Yes.
would certainly have access to these. If there's parent companies or companies that are that they work for or affiliated for, they would have access to these. The consumer, a lot of times there's a fiduciary requirement for a lot of these agents, so they would, in theory, have access to these types of things. So again, it's not just us. So, and I don't want to speak completely out of turn because I don't have our counsel here, but I believe there's some federal requirements that also come into play with this.
Thank you. We don't hear about title companies very often, so I appreciate that. Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is really a follow-up to your question. So when you say they have access to it, where is it being filed that allows for that access?
In terms of like the underwriters or somebody like that, I guess I don't have a great answer to that question, but my assumption would be that the underwriter requests that as part of their process for when they're in their underwriting processes of the insurer so that they could get those audits sent to them from the agents or the underlying title agency.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe you can confirm that for us before we work this bill?
Certainly.
So that we do know that there's a repository or would it make more sense for us to require that the title agents file those with underwriters instead of the insurance commission?
I mean, that's certainly up to the will of this body and the committee. I don't want to speak for the title industry or their underwriters in that sense. For that, I think from our perspective, since the requirement of law is to still do the audit, we would still have the ability to take action for them. We feel like just sending them to the department isn't as necessary, but again, we wouldn't necessarily be opposed to what the will of the body is.
Thank you, Kyle. Any other questions, committee? And we do have written testimony. Did you have a question?
I do.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Fack.
So there's a follow-up, Madam Chairman, to your question, my question here. Have you ever had where that CPA report, have we had a title agent ever go under? Has this ever been used in the history that you know of?
As far as the audit piece,
Yes, where would it help you?
where we got the audit and we said, hey, this isn't right. I'm not aware of that, but I will say that the surety bond piece, the department, since we hold those, we have received requests to collect on those bonds, which is often where we would know if there's a problem that is developed in this situation. So the bond actually sort of carries a redundancy over top of the audit anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you for entertaining all of our questions. Committee, you do have, and I wish you were here today. I don't think Ashley's here, but we do have neutral testimony from Kansas Land Title Association. So is there we have no opponents? And I said that was neutral. I apologize. That is proponent testimony from the land title folks. You'll see Ashley Garr co-chair, Kansas Land Title Association. I don't see any opponent testimony, and I don't see any neutral testimony. Okay, in that case, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 22. Thank you, Kyle. Next committee, we're going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 27. And Eileen, would you like to give us an overview of that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate Bill 27 eliminates the requirement that the Commissioner of Insurance submit 2 different reports to the governor and strikes several specific entities from the definition of person for the purpose of the enforcement statute for insurance law. First, Senate Bill 27 amends KSA 40-108 and removes the requirement that the commissioner make an annual report to the governor of the general conduct and condition of the insurance companies in the state. The bill also amends KSA 40-2253, removing the requirement that the commissioner report to the governor and to the legislature regarding the development of uniform electronic data interchange formats and standards with a proposed plan and cost impact assessment. And lastly, Senate Bill 27 amends KSA 40-2, 125, which is the insurance enforcement statute. If you recall, back in 2023, we amended the statute on the department's request by adding "and any legal entity under the jurisdiction of the commissioner" to that definition to kind of broaden the statute without listing a whole host of different entities that would need to be updated. Senate bill further amends the definition of person by striking certain entities in that listing that are currently included under the definition, also kind of making it a little bit more broad and less susceptible to needing to be amended. And with that, Madam Chair, I can stand for questions.
Thank you, Eileen. Committee, do you have questions of Eileen? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate that. Today we have, oh gosh, a stranger to our committee. Only kidding. Eric Turek, would you like to come up and provide testimony?
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Eric Turek from the Kansas Department of Insurance. I'll speak to the report to the governor portion of this bill, and then I'll speak to the definition of person, more technical aspect of the bill. You see on page 1 in the middle of that page, the commission, there's a requirement in statute for the commissioner to submit an annual report to the governor. I'll say 2 things on that front. 1, the commissioner of insurance is elected on a statewide ballot by the people of Kansas, and 2, and 3 actually. We do, the commissioner does communicate with the governor on the status of insurance companies, and 3, the annual reports are already listed on our website under the publications section. On the last page of the bill, on page 3, it speaks to what I'll call a proto-internet age report to be submitted to the governor and the legislature dating back to 1993. Eliminating that is just cleanup. And then on page 2, amending the definition of person. This may look familiar to this committee because I have been before this committee for 2 years in a row. This is the 3rd year in a row touching this statute. And I hope not to come again and touch this statute. So in 2023, we added the ending sentence there, "and any other legal entity under the jurisdiction of the commissioner," to ensure that we didn't have to constantly visit the statute. This is our insurer and non-producer entity licensing statute. And so we tied it up on the back end, but on the front end, we still have entities in this laundry list like automobile clubs, and the legislature deregulated automobile clubs in 2021. It's still in there. We tried to clean it up last year, unfortunately, in House Bill 2530. Unfortunately, that died in conference. And so just to honestly ensure that we don't have to visit the statute whenever the legislature desires to make a change, we are simplifying the statute. There's a couple entities still listed there, and those specifically are risk-bearing entities, and that's why we decided to keep those. And those are consistent with other definition of person statutes in Chapter 40. Happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Eric. Committee, do you have questions? Yes, Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Eric, for being here. So is there any other part of our statutes that require the Commissioner of Insurance to make an annual report? You've said to me that it's on the website, but are you required to make one?
That's a very good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. In terms of a statutory requirement to produce an annual report, very good question. I'll have to do some research on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I love the fact that it's on the website. I appreciate that we don't need to do the part of sending it to the governor, but we might want to assure ourselves that that annual report is made.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for Eric? All right, committee, if you'll look at our agenda, you'll see that we don't have any opponent testimony. We don't have any neutral testimony. So if there are no questions, we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 27. That will be the end of the work for this committee today, and we're ending sooner than I thought we would, which honestly is a good thing. We have many things to accomplish in the next couple of weeks. Our next meeting, of course, is tomorrow. We're going to have a hearing on Senate Bill 28, and I want to remind you that February 3rd is the last day for bill introductions and non-exempt committees, and that would be us. So make sure you've got that in mind if you're thinking of making any introductions, bill introductions. Next week, remember, we're going to meet on Monday. We want to make sure that we have gotten through everything that we need to do between hearing our bills and also working bills, which we'll start doing here pretty quickly. All right. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned.